The African food service market currently holds a valuation of $75.92 billion, and its trajectory suggests it will cross the $100 billion mark by 2031. This growth is propelled by an expanding middle class and an urbanization rate that is rapidly approaching 45.5%. Historically, across global markets, this specific demographic shift, rapid urbanization combined with rising disposable income, triggers an immediate explosion of quick-service restaurants. Yet outside of South Africa, global fast food penetration across the continent is almost non-existent. Analysts at the World Bank refer to this dynamic as the McTipping point, a hypothesis that attempts to define the precise macroeconomic conditions a developing country must meet before global food chains enter the market. The current market data suggests that consumer demand and demographics are only part of the equation. Underlying infrastructure serves as the primary gatekeeper of globalization. For decades, economists assumed that a rising GDP per capita automatically signaled a country's readiness for Western franchise models. Global chains have entered exceptionally low-income markets before. When the first McDonald's opened in Shenzhen in 1990, China's GDP per capita was under $500. When the brand entered Moscow in 1990, the income baseline was similarly low, but consumer demand drove aggressive expansion. This scatterplot maps McDonald's expansion against a country's GDP at entry, establishing a remarkably low historical threshold. Yet overlaying 22 sub-Saharan nations reveals an anomaly. They possess higher incomes than these baselines, but lack any global quick-service presence. The GDP metric overlooks three distinct structural barriers: the availability of commercial capital, the stability of local investments, and the integration of supply chains. Applying standard Western macroeconomic indicators to Africa yields false positives because those metrics fail to account for systemic, structural market friction. To understand the financial mechanics keeping local entrepreneurs out, we have to look at this flowchart, which details the standard Western QSR architecture. The first major point of friction occurs right at the start, with the rigid upfront capital requirements demanded by multinational brands. Becoming a franchisee requires hundreds of thousands of dollars in unborrowed upfront capital, often reaching up to $357,000. In markets like South Africa, where the average income hovers around $1,429 a month, meeting this liquidity threshold is mathematically impossible for the growing middle class. Underdeveloped regional banking sectors and steep interest rates further choke off access to the commercial credit required to close that gap. The global franchise model is financially incompatible with the region's banking development, as it requires Western capital liquidity in a nascent financial market. Returning to our flowchart, a second friction point emerges at the global supply chain node, driven by the strict ingredient standardization mandated by global franchises. These rigid corporate standards frequently prohibit operators from utilizing local agriculture, forcing them to rely on complex, imported supply networks. The fragility of this system was exposed in 2022, when KFC suffered a total operational failure and ran entirely out of French fries across Kenya. Despite Kenya's abundant local potato harvest, farmers had not cleared the global brand's internal quality assurance process. The resulting shortage was a breakdown in corporate logistics, occurring in a region with no shortage of raw produce. Consequently, the franchise was entirely dependent on a delayed and congested shipping route from Egypt, paralyzing local operations. When supply chains are strung across oceans, local operators are severely penalized by currency depreciation and import tariffs. Enforcing rigid global supply standards in emerging markets does not guarantee quality assurance. It creates fatal operational vulnerabilities. The third friction point lies in physical infrastructure deficits, specifically the volatility of the energy grid. Severe power outages dictate daily operations across the continent, ranging from Eskom's load-shedding policies in South Africa to frequent total grid collapses in Nigeria. These electrical blackouts force restaurant operators to absorb an off-grid premium, requiring heavy investments in expensive diesel generators and redundant cold chain storage just to keep food safe. This energy price volatility operates in tandem with high regional food inflation and frequent meat shortages. By the time these operating costs reach the menu board, a basic hamburger, a product engineered globally as cheap convenience food, balloons into a $14 luxury item. Western quick service models fail in Africa because their highly standardized unit economics cannot absorb these systemic infrastructure taxes. To capture the market's projected 5.12% growth, local African operators are actively re-engineering the QSR architecture to bypass these exact bottlenecks. They are stripping away grid reliance to eliminate the off-grid premium by investing heavily in independent solar arrays. For several domestic brands, this energy pivot has reduced grid dependence by 60%, drastically stabilizing their monthly operating costs. Simultaneously, operators are executing a real estate pivot. They are abandoning expensive high street and mall leases, which can consume up to 20% of revenue, in favor of cloud kitchens. These production-only facilities are currently driving a 7.42% compound annual growth rate by amortizing fixed costs across multiple virtual brands operating from a single roof. Success in this market requires decentralizing physical footprints to actively insulate the business against infrastructure failure. This new chart illustrates the final structural shift. Operators are dismantling the fragile import model, utilizing the African Continental Free Trade Area to deeply integrate local agricultural supply chains. Sourcing ingredients locally protects operators from sudden currency depreciation and eliminates the import bottlenecks that crippled legacy franchises. The final architectural shift occurs at the distribution layer, where operators are capitalizing on a 52% regional smartphone penetration rate. Hyperlocal delivery aggregators like Chowdeck and Glovo completely bypass the need for centralized, expensive dining rooms. These digital platforms monetize urban congestion, turning consumer time scarcity into a reliable driver of off-premise sales. Dominance in this sector is shifting toward operators who bypass rigid Western templates entirely, opting instead for localized systems engineered for the continent's specific infrastructure and financial realities.